What's cracking, everybody? And hold on, wait a second. Is it just me, or is it a little bit darker in here than normal? There we go. That's a bit better. What's cracking, everybody? And welcome back to Kraken R&R for one of the ugliest, weird, but yeah, very ugly game from the Seattle Kraken as they lose 4-1 to the New York Rangers in the final game of their first homestand. And this is easily one of the worst games, if not the worst game they've played in a long time. I would say easily the worst of the season so far. Sure, the 4-1 score is nothing new this season, unfortunately, but the way they played in this game, there isn't a single team in the NHL, maybe the Sharks, but honestly I'm not even sure about that they would have beaten playing this way. And certainly not a team as good as the Rangers. But before we get into the game, and unfortunately some pretty bad news even outside of the loss, there was at least some good news for the Kraken to start off this game, that being that Jaden Schwartz, who left the last one in the third period and didn't return, was back for this game and looked perfectly fine, so at least the Kraken haven't lost him to injury just yet. So then as the game gets started in the first period, with Grubauer net instead of Decorda as expected, which for Grubauer, it wasn't his best game. In fact, it was probably his worst game of the season too. The team in front of him didn't give him a lot to work with, and he did make some big saves, but yeah, it was a tough night for everyone. Anyways, the game gets started. The Kraken actually get off to a pretty good start for the first minute and a half, but then we end up with a 10-15 minute delay as one of the corners of the rink had the lights off, which meant that it was a little bit darker towards the Rangers' end of the ice, and as a result, that does make it a little bit harder for the goaltender to see the puck. Not really enough that I think affected play too much, but enough that for the competitiveness of the game, they can't afford to have one team have a slight advantage over the other, so they decided after a while of trying to get it fixed and it not working, to just have the teams switch ends of the ice at the midpoint of each period, which was definitely strange. And I would be willing to say that it was that break in play that threw the Kraken off after they got off to that good start, but honestly, they continued to play well after the extended break while they tried to figure out the lights. And they end up coming back and getting the first goal on the board as the Schultz-Dumoulin pair had easily its best game of the season. And it's that pair that hooks up for the first goal as Dumoulin passes it down to Schultz by the faceoff circle. He fires off a one-timer and beats Quick at the dark end of the ice to give the Kraken the 1-0 lead. And as the first period goes along, it's a pretty evenly played first period, but just a couple minutes later we hit that halfway mark and the teams switch ends. And not long after they switch ends, it's the Rangers' turn to score on the dark end of the ice as Panarin gets completely forgotten about. Again, it was not that dark in that corner, so I don't know what the excuse is here for it ends up being Larson and Dunn of just forgetting about one of the best players in the league. But as you can see from the screenshot, he is wide open with all the time in the world to pick where he wants to score on Grubauer. I think he ends up going 5-hole. Either way, it was not one that Grubauer was given much of a chance on, and the Rangers tie the game up just like that. And then, towards the end of the first period, this is where things take a turn for the worse for the Kraken, maybe even as far as the season is concerned, as Burakovsky, down in the Rangers' end in the corner as the play is going away from him, well after he has gotten rid of the puck, takes a big hit from Trouba. Definitely a late hit, and this is just the kind of thing you expect from Trouba. At least once every other game, he's gonna take a run at somebody and lay a questionable hit at best. And you know that at least a couple of those hits over the course of the season are going to injure players, and unfortunately, the Kraken are the victim here as Burakovsky slides into the board shoulder first and takes a little while to get up. And by the time he does get up, he doesn't even take his stick with him. He's holding his shoulder and would not return to this game. After the game, Hackstall, who usually says nothing about injuries, this time at least was able to say that he didn't think it was going to be anything short term. My guess would be, while all they'll say is an upper body injury, I would say it looked like a broken collarbone, and we're likely to see Burakovsky out for quite a while. And unfortunately, this has started to become a bit of a trend for the Kraken here early in the season, losing players to dirty hits, as they've already lost Tanev to a dirty hit in the very first game of the season. They nearly lost McCann in the last game to a dirty hit, even if it was, I think, an accident, just two players that didn't see the other one coming. And now they lose another guy, probably for an extended period of time, to another dirty hit from a guy that is known for laying dirty hits. And yes, the officials did punish Trouba in the form of a 2-minute minor for boarding, which is obviously enough, even though the Kraken are now going to lose one of their best forwards for a good chunk of the season and the rest of this game. 2 minutes is clearly enough penalty for what was obviously a late hit into the boards. Either way, the Kraken don't do anything with that penalty, and then choose to just let Trouba off scot-free. They don't go after him for the honor of Burakovsky or in defense of him. Nope, they just decide that that's dealt with after the penalty and move on. And yes, I know, I've been on the record multiple times already this season and even in the last game saying that I'm not a big fan of fighting in hockey, and I do think that going after players and picking fights right after big hits is pretty dumb, especially clean hits. But I can't deny that it is still a part of the game, and especially after a dirty hit that clearly injures one of your best players. Shouldn't even have to matter that it's one of your best players, but in this case it is. That is definitely a time that with hockey, in the state that it's in, where fighting is a thing, you need to set that precedent that that's not all right, and you're not just going to let that go like the Kraken have kind of gotten a bit of a reputation for doing. They're not a team that really goes after fights all that often. And so that is the case once again here. They just let this dirty hit slide and don't go after Trouba. In fact, the only punishment that the Kraken really deal on Trouba the rest of the game is a couple minutes later, Gord comes out of the penalty box for something unrelated and goes and lays a bit of a half-hearted late check on Trouba that I don't think really even registered to him. Gord is, again, coming out of the penalty box. I don't think he really wanted to go back in it for a late hit. Plus, he is noticeably smaller than Trouba, and if he had gone full out with this check, he might have ended up the worse for it. So probably the best that Gord wasn't the one that goes after him there. And to be perfectly honest, part of the problem for the Kraken in going after players for dirty hits is that they don't really have the fighter type of guy on their team. There's not really anybody that could go toe-to-toe with, say, a Trouba, for example, other than maybe Alexiak or Larson. And you don't really usually want to send one of your defensemen going after for revenge fights. So maybe that's part of the problem. And I guess as far as that's concerned, maybe the Kraken will get that solved is with Burakovsky likely to miss a good chunk of the season. I wouldn't be surprised if we do see John Hayden come up now finally. They do have Devon Shore, who's been sitting on the bench for the last couple of games, but yeah, Hayden is the type of guy that can definitely go after those fights, and if he comes up, I wouldn't be surprised to see him go to the defense of a couple of players. And let's face it, that toughness on the forward end in particular that Hayden can provide for the Kraken is something that they clearly desperately need at this point in the season, with things going the way that they have for the Kraken to this point. Because again, whether or not you like fighting in hockey and guys going after other guys for laying big hits, dirty or otherwise, but especially the ones that injure your teammates, it is still a part of the game and very much a part of the culture of the sport. So you can't afford to be the one team in the league that refuses to go to the defense of your teammates and let opposing players know that those type of hits are just not going to be okay. And you're not going to let it slide and just give that message of, yeah, go ahead and tee off on our guys because we're just going to let it go and not think anything of it. And that definitely is the message the Kraken have been sending so far, as they've only had the one fight in response to a hit, that being Cartier going after Lemieux in the last game following the McCann hit. Now, granted, the hit on Tanev in the first game of the season, Howden was kicked out then and there, so the Kraken haven't had a chance to go after him, although it is sometimes a thing where guys will go after just someone else on the team if the guy who laid the hit isn't available. Again, I think that's kind of stupid too, but it is, again, still a part of the culture of the game as it is right now. And yes, it still is true, the thing that I pointed out in a previous video on this subject, that because the Kraken play so well through their depth and rolling all four lines, they do have a little bit more to lose than most teams in the NHL when it comes to trading a fourth line player for somebody on the other team, because the fourth line is so much more valuable for the Kraken than it is for most teams. They don't have a O'Connor, for example, like in the Avalanche game that they can send after somebody, like the Avalanche did after Eberle, and then the Kraken sent nobody after Makar, because most of the Kraken fourth line players are more valuable than O'Connor is, for example. However, now that the Kraken are down 2 forwards, that fourth line is quickly looking more and more like your typical fourth line, made up of mostly AHL level players. I mean, still, it's going to be just 2 of that style of player, with Belmar and either Cartier or Yamamoto going to be accompanied by either Hayden or Shore. But the more guys you lose on the forward end, the more expendable that fourth line is when it comes to being able to send them for fights and off to the penalty box for 5 minutes. Anyway, with all that having been said, we can move on from that subject, at least for now anyway. It's going to come back up again at the end of the game. But as we get through the next two-ish periods, we don't really have to spend too much time on it. Things do really unravel for the Kraken, and it gets pretty ugly as they revert to looking like the early inaugural season Kraken, basically just 5 random dudes that just met, just skating around out there, throwing the puck all over the place, pretty much at random, with no real chemistry or sense of reason to the way they were playing the game, and basically just let the Rangers win this game regardless of how they were playing. Now, I suppose to be fair, it does take until the back half of the second period, when the Kraken are defending the light end of the ice, for things to really start to unravel for them, so I suppose it was only half of the game that the Kraken played poorly, but they didn't get any kind of lead going into that half, even through back-to-back slightly overlapping power plays that they had, and then a penalty kill, which they did manage to kill off the lone Rangers power play. But although the Kraken do kill it off, the Rangers are able to get momentum out of that power play, and soon after, still in the Kraken end of the ice, Trouba, of course, who still has yet to be punished, takes a shot, and it squeaks through Grubauer, one that he really does have to stop. He sees the shot coming clean, but it squeaks through him, and it's sitting on the goal line, and then Kakko's the first one to get to it, so he shoves it into the net, and it's 2-1 Rangers. Then a few minutes later, another great pass from Hedel finds Lafreniere in the slot, where there's 4 Kraken players around him, so there's really no excuse for him to be able to get a clean stick on this and roof it over Grubauer, but he's able to do just that. It's a very nice deflection off of the nice pass from Hedel by Lafreniere, so just like that, it's 3-0 Rangers as we go into the third, and then early on in the third, there's a bouncing puck right through the slot that, granted, the Kraken do get a bit unlucky here, as the puck is batted out of the air by Panarin in the slot. He's surrounded by Kraken players, but it bounces off the backs of both Alexiak and Eberle before landing in front of him, and then even at that, he's whacking at a wildly bouncing puck, but happens to hit it perfectly into the top corner. So another perfect shot off a bouncing puck that goes into the top corner for the Rangers, and it's 4-1, which is where it would stay. However, while that is where the score would stop, there were still plenty more fireworks to be had in this game, as around the halfway mark of the third period, Gord lays a massive, clean, but big hit right in front of the Rangers bench on Hedel, which the Rangers obviously take exception to, because it's a big hit on one of their first line players who already has 3 assists in this game, and it's right in front of their faces. Then Gord, having to skate right in front of that bench to get to the Kraken bench after laying the hit, is taking it in the ear from the bench, and then eventually, while, guys yelling at him is perfectly fine, that's normal and happens in maybe even most games, one of the guys on the Rangers bench takes a swing at Gord, which he does not take kindly to. He's already Gord, he is willing to stand up for himself, and I think there's a good amount of frustration with how the season is going and how this game has gone that runs into this as well, as Gord turns and starts swinging at the Rangers bench. And that is going to draw a crowd, which it does very quickly. Unfortunately for Gord, it draws a Ranger crowd a little bit quicker, as Fox comes up and gives Gord a huge cross-check in the back that sends him to the ice and his helmet flying. And then as soon as Gord gets up, Kreider comes and gives him another even bigger cross-check with his helmet off into the boards and once again to the ice. Very, very dangerous hit here. If Gord's a little bit closer, his unhelmeted head very well could have gone into the top of the board, and that definitely could have led to a pretty big injury. And with this whole situation, well, look, Gord was definitely asking for it, and as a result, he probably should have been expecting, even though he didn't see it coming, the cross-check to the back by Fox, being that he's now involved with the bench. And yeah, it's still a cross-check to the back in front of the board, so it's definitely not a legal hit that Fox lays here. Still one that Gord probably should be expecting. The second one by Kreider, especially with Gord having his helmet off, there's nothing more to say about it other than this is a dirty, scummy play by Kreider to go after Gord again here with his helmet off, hitting him into the boards in his back while he doesn't see it coming. And yeah, maybe he's still expecting maybe a little bit of a follow-up from Fox, but not another guy skating into a cross-check in his back while his helmet is off and he's facing the boards with their... This is the part where there's no glass even to protect him from the top of the actual board. And of course, it is this second dirty scumbag hit by Kreider that draws a little bit more of a crowd and some other Kraken players getting involved, as Kreider ends up getting dragged to the ice, and then Gord standing over him, yelling at him, and to be a fly on the wall or sitting on the Rangers bench to hear what Gord was saying to Kreider. Oh, if only. But unfortunately, the only people that I'll ever know are the ref that's also standing there and the other players in the vicinity. And it probably is whatever Gord said here that gets him the extra misconduct and kicked out of the game, while both he and Kreider took 4 minutes worth double minor of roughing, Gord likely for going after the bench, which you're definitely not supposed to be doing, and Kreider for his dirty hit on Gord into the boards, while he didn't have a helmet on. And yes, this is where we now have to get into that whole thing that we just went over earlier in this video all over again, because 4 minutes later, Kreider's able to leave the box after serving his double minor without a care in the world, because no one's going to come to the defense or honor of Gord after he's been kicked out of the game and let Kreider know that it's not okay to try to decapitate one of their players on the boards in front of the Rangers bench. Instead, Kreider just gets to play the rest of the game like nothing ever happened, and well, yes, while Kreider was in the box, McCann drops gloves with Trocheck. That turns out is actually because of a hit earlier on in the third period on Dumoulin that nearly caused him to leave the game, as Trocheck left his feet to lay Dumoulin into the boards away from the play, so another dirty hit from a Ranger player that does eventually elicit a response. Unfortunately, that response comes from Jared McCann. And while it's great to see a Kraken player coming to the defense of another Kraken player who was nearly injured on a dirty hit, you really don't want to be making the trade of your leading goal scorer and point scorer from the last 2 seasons and current leading goal scorer on this season, although that's not saying a lot considering it's only 2 that leads the team. Either way, trading McCann for Vincent Trocheck is, not a good trade to be making when it's coming to sending a player to the box for 5 minutes, maybe even more than 5 minutes, depending on when the next whistle is after the 5 minutes are up. Especially considering at that point, I think the Kraken were still down 2. Actually, they were down 3 by the time the McCann fight happens, but either way, you don't want to be losing your highest scoring player, highest scoring forward, while you're trying to at least make something happen late in this third period. Anyway, as far as this game is concerned, it probably didn't really matter that it was McCann that went to the box, because the way the Kraken were playing, they were never coming back to win this game or tie it to get it to overtime for that matter. So yeah, the Rangers go on to win this game 4-1. Again, the worst game, even outside of the whole fighting situation and all the hits and losing Burakovsky for probably a good chunk of the rest of the season. This is the worst game the Kraken have played to this point and have played for a big, long stretch of time. In fact, I'm pretty sure I can say with confidence they played worse in this game than they did at all in the postseason, and maybe even some of the games leading up to the playoffs last year. So yeah, it's been quite a while since the Kraken played this disorganized and ugly and just generally terrible. Hopefully they can get things turned around, because up next they have a Detroit team that has gotten off to a hot start this season, and get to see Daniel Sprong again, who has 2 goals himself, so he'd be right there with the tops among the Kraken players. And then you get Carolina again, which they did just beat Carolina, and Carolina seems to be giving goals up like their candy, as they just gave up another huge crooked number to Colorado a couple days after giving up 7 to the Kraken. I don't know. I guess we'll just have to see how this road trip goes. The schedule, like I said, isn't going to get any easier for the Kraken really throughout November until you get to December, where they start to get some of the teams that aren't supposed to be very good. But at this point, it's starting to look like the Kraken might just be one of those teams, and the farther they dig themselves into this hole, the harder and harder it is going to be to dig themselves out. Especially considering, while they were getting the shots on goal in those first few games, even if they were losing them, they at least were playing in a way that they were generating offense and chances to score, and you knew the scoring was going to come eventually. In this game, 17 shots on goal is just not going to do it almost any night in the NHL. So just another example of how poorly they played. 17 shots on goal. They lose the face-off battle. They lose pretty much everything, every aspect of this game. And it's getting ugly. Anyway, I don't really know what else there is to say about this game. Full disclosure, I'm actually recording this Sunday morning after the game because I had a migraine coming back from it, and just didn't really want to record this video and go through what I knew was going to have to be a rant about the whole fighting thing with the Kraken while having a migraine, so I probably made the video a little bit better, and even if it's out a little bit later. Plus, as far as Kraken 3 stars are concerned, we definitely don't have to do 3. I do feel like Justin Schultz is deserving of 1. Sure, he scores the goal, but that pair of he and Dumoulin really had their first, easily their best game, but honestly the first game where I felt like they actually played well as a pair this season, so at least that's a good sign, and hopefully Dumoulin's all right. Heck, even Patreon agreed with me that the Kraken did not deserve 3 stars in this game. So again, quick reminder, if you want to be a part of picking Kraken 3 stars or saying that there shouldn't be stars, you can do that by joining and helping support the channel a little bit more over on Patreon. And after every game, I put up a poll or a comment asking for who you think of the 3 stars, and definitely take that into consideration when picking those 3 stars, or not picking them in this case. As always, let me know what you think down in the comment section below, your feelings probably on that whole fighting situation, and hopefully seeing John Hayden up here sooner rather than later. But unfortunately, it's probably going to be a while before we see Burakovsky again. Again, we won't know anything other than upper body injury, but especially the way he left the ice and not even picking up his stick, I would say that a broken collarbone is a fairly safe assumption to make, even if it is just that, an assumption. So, yeah, could be a tough one. Till next time, though, in Detroit on Tuesday, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.